today's message is going to be called is the docu-series Hidden Colors as important today in 2026 as it was important when it first came out. I'll tell you this, family. Hell yeah, it is. When I think about Hidden Colors and the origins of it, I'm going to keep it funky with you, family. I was a latecomer. My introduction into theology, knowledge of self, and things of that sort came at a very early age. It came at a time where I was least expecting it. It came when I was 19 years old. When I was 19 years old, I was in the streets. I was a young cotton club. I was a rough around the edges cotton club. I had a no nonsense attitude. I grew up rough, family, like many of us in this room. You know, you couldn't really talk to me how people talk to me today. I was the type of individual who, if you said the wrong thing at the wrong time, hands might fly. That's just the type of dude I was at 19 years old. But I met an individual by the name of Tony Ricks. This individual also was a brother who was rough around the edges. He was a brother who, at this time that I met him, was a quiet man. He was a gentle giant, but there was something about him that gravitated me toward him. And that was his willing to talk about things that I never heard before. He was very, very, very wise. And before I knew his story, he would just be talking a lot. And he would say things that was profound. So imagine this 19-year-old kid who's in the streets, man. I ain't really trying to hear nothing. But this dude who I met at a job, he just was always talking about something. Before I put an ear to it, I just saw him as this older guy who was just always talking. But one day I started listening to what he was saying, family. And then he started talking about black man this and the black man that and the black man, he's just going off about this. And I'm like, okay, black man, what? What is this dude talking about? And then he asked me a question one time we were talking. And he said, have you ever read the book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed? And I looked at him and I said, no, I never read that. And he said, here. He gave me the book. He said, here, read this. And I looked at him and I said, it was a big ass book. I said, I can't read this book. He said, just read it paragraph by paragraph and read a little bit every day for the next week. Just a paragraph a day. And I said, all right, man. Took the book home, put it on the dresser. Didn't really pay no mind to it. One day I just said, man, let me see what this book is about. Pedagogy of the Oppressed by a guy by the name of Pablo Freire. Brazilian dude. I opened the book and I started reading the introduction. I started reading a little into the first paragraph, introduction. And I said, man, this shit is crazy. What is this? What kind of book did this man give me? So I kept reading it and reading it and reading it. And it just started to I'm reading about how this dude is talking about how oppressed people, in order to be oppressed, they have to almost omit their oppression. They have to accept their oppression. There's a level of accepting your oppression. And even when you are an oppressed people, not only do you have to take on the language, culture, identity, thoughts, practices of the oppressor, but many people do this willingly. Pablo Freire was talking about. But then he talked about ways people resist oppression by the way they walk, by the way they talk, by the way they think. All these ways people resist oppression. And I started to think, family, he's talking, Pablo Freire is talking about this in this book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And he's just talking about how people who are under oppression go through multiple levels of psychosis. And one of those levels is accepting the oppression. And then there are others who do not accept that oppression, who resist against that oppression. And then I started thinking, wow, man, that kind of sound like Black America. That sound like me. That sound like me. Everything I do, I resist. I don't like authority, so I could never go to the army. I don't really, yeah, at the time I was in foster care, I didn't really listen to my foster moms. I thought she was backwards. I resisted everything, didn't understand why. And in a sense, before this brother Tony Ricks gave me this book, I even started to resist him. Like, man, get out of here. What are you dude talking about? You always talking that. But then it came to a point where I started reading into the book, and it said something very profound, family. Pablo Freire said, the relationship between a student and a teacher is interchangeable, where the whole process of education, in order for it to be truly successful, it can't go from one person just to another. That's what he said, family. Pablo Freire said that. In order to truly get education, a teacher must become a student, family, and a student must become a teacher. That's what he said. When I read that, family, I said, damn, that's crazy. So I went back to Tony Ricks after I read into this book, and we had a deep conversation about this book that he lent me. And I'm just telling him, yo, man, I read all of this stuff, man, about the teacher must become a student and the student must become a teacher and all of this stuff. And his eyes lit up. His eyes lit up because he realized that he had planted a seed. He had planted a seed into someone who was fertile, someone who was worthy of, someone who he could share something with. And that's how I begin my journey in this thing we call knowledge of self. Every day, me and that brother Tony Ricks would talk about all kinds of things. And he would ask me all kinds of questions. And he would give me all kinds of books. And I would read all kinds of literature from all of the master teachers before I knew who they were later on. He introduced me to Amos Wilson and understanding the psychology of white supremacy and what that does to children at an early age, how it can make children think of themselves of inferior just by accepting certain things in school, in that school system, that prison to pipeline system. When you send your kids to that school system, not properly educated, how they can indoctrinate your kids and turn your kids into inferior people. That's what Amos Wilson was talking about in that child psychology. He introduced me to brother Dr. Heinrich Clark, another FBA brother, how he was navigating Jim Crow, segregation, how he was a poor FBA brother who was working with this YT family who was well off, and they had a library in their home. And one day, a young Dr. Heinrich Clark snuck up into that library and started pulling books out, taking them home and reading them, and getting introduced to all kinds of Black knowledge and Black authors, to one day him himself becoming an author and an educator. That was his conduit to his enlightenment. I started to read upon Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. They came before Columbus, how he so effortlessly, because it wasn't hard, all the evidence was there, all the facts were there, pointing to Black folks being in the Americas long before the Asiatic Native Americans, they call themselves. Long before Christopher Columbus, the Spaniards, and the YT. Ivan Van Sertima said so confidently that no, those Negroes were there long before the YT man and long before those Asiatics crossed that Bering Strait. Those Negroes were there. All the archaeological proof is all there. It's in the ground. It's in the soil. The bones are still there. That's what Ivan Van Sertima said, family. So I began to continue to dig, family. Tony Ricks began to notice something in me, family. Can I share it with you guys? He said to me one day while we were having a conversation, he said, I wish that I knew as much as you know when I was your age. He said, when I was your age, 1920, he said, I was in prison. He said, I was doing a 15-year bid for armed robbery. I was a stick-up kid when I was 19, 20 years old. He said, it took me 15 years in prison in a total transformation to come to where you are right now. And he said, I appreciate you, brother, because you don't just take in the knowledge and take in what I'm telling you. You go do the research. You go ask the right questions. You go find it out. And then you come back and you drop that on me. That brother, Tony Ricks, was an FBA brother from Harlem. He was a young brother in Harlem in the 80s whose family came from Virginia, who got turned out by the street life and ended up becoming a stick-up kid. He was a brother who, if he saw you with the right stuff on, you may not have nothing on by the time he left. And he was leaving with everything. He was that kind of brother in those Harlem streets. What they called it, Sugar Hill. See, the thing about it is with brother Tony Ricks, see, I got to meet the educator, the poet, the scholar, the genuine, kind, sweet brother who introduced me to bodies of information that turned me into an information junkie. I got to meet that brother. But as he started to tell me his story of how he got turned out in those Harlem streets during the 80s when crack was big and you didn't have a lot of conduits outside of going to college or going to what they call that penitentiary school. And he turned into a stick-up kid and got himself in a hell of problems and ended up doing a 15-year bid in Elmira and other prisons. In these prisons, he had to make a decision. He had to decide what kind of individual he was going to be. He had a lot of time in that box, in that dirty, filthy box that those people put him in because he wasn't trying to listen to nobody. And in his time, he made, in that 15-year bid, he made the biggest transformation in his life. He got his GED. He became a scholar. He became a poet. And he became a man of honor and respect. He came out and changed his whole life. Changed my life. I wouldn't be here, family. I'm telling you, I wouldn't be the man I am today. Cotton Club wouldn't be talking to you today if it wasn't for that brother, Tony Ricks. Why does this connect to Hidden Colors, family? Why? Why is Cotton Club talking all that Cotton Club stuff? Why am I talking this? How does this connect to Hidden Colors? It connects, family, because by the time I hit Hidden Colors, I knew all of the information that was being presented in that docuseries. I knew it was correct because I read the actual books. I knew the names of the people. I spent the hours upon years putting in the work, hitting the libraries, borrowing the books, bringing them back, reading the scholars, reading Brother Ashra Kwesi break down Medu Neter, listening to him go into Egypt, break down all of the Medu Neter as he went into Ramses' tomb and broke down that Ramses' name wasn't even Ramses. How Europeans did the lazy route when they couldn't really read his entire name. They just stopped at the Ramses part. But Brother Ashra Kwesi broke it down. He said, as he read the Medu Neter and put his hands on it, family, like he was reading Grail, he said, his name is Ursa Ma'at Ra, Setaten Ra, Remisul Murray Amen. And the Ramses is really Remisul. I said, what the hell is going on? How could he know this? See, family, when I started to dissect this hidden colors before I knew who Brother Tariq Nasheed was, before I knew anything, I knew that the information being presented was substantialized in pounds and tons and tons and tons of literature and scholarship. And it was true because I read the actual books and I knew the actual names. And I saw what it was doing to people, this hidden colors. All this information in a docuseries that most people could never find the original documents, could never find the books, but it was all being presented to you and it was all researched and properly fed to you in a good time frame. And it lit people up. It woke people up. I saw it. Hidden Colors did for most people what Brother Tony Ricks did for me. So I fell in love with the docuseries. I wanted to really dig into this. And then it hit me, family. It hit me that Hidden Colors was not just necessary for our people here, FBAs here, but it was necessary for melanated people all over the planet. And I think this is the reason why people misconstrue people to think Tariq Nasheed was a Pan-Africanist. He was not a Pan-Africanist. Tony Ricks was not a Pan-Africanist. He was just a brother who was a junkie of information and who lived and breathed this stuff. You understand what I'm saying, family? Who loved our people and wanted to dig in the crates and give our people the information they need to free themselves mentally, spiritually, and physically. So Hidden Colors wasn't a Pan-Africanist docuseries. It was a docuseries for information junkies. Do you understand what I'm saying, family? It just so happened that you, me, were information junkies. So now, is Hidden Colors as important in 2026 as it was when it first came out? Yes, family. And I'll tell you why. It is because even though we as a people have went through the process of getting the information, our master teachers took their time out to research the information and made sure that we got it down packed. They made sure that they put their lives on the line to make sure that we got educated properly. Not because they wanted us to go back to Africa, not because they wanted us to put Africans on a pedestal and worship them. They just wanted us to understand that in a world dominated by YT supremacy, there is a thing called the Asiatic black man, and there is a thing called Afrocentrism There is a thing called putting ourselves first and not allowing some YT to put their perspective set in stone. Our master teachers wanted us to understand that. And they also wanted us to understand how to be critical thinkers and how to question the information presented. Do your research. Don't just take what I'm telling you. Do your research. That's what the master teachers wanted us to do. So here we are in 2026, using all of the weapons our master teachers taught us: critical thinking, thorough research, how to, when you're reading information, how to extract what's necessary and leave the garbage to the ash cans of history, how to make sure when you're filtering information that you have first, second, third, other options of material, of scholarship to then question that question. That's what the master teachers taught us, family. So here we are, built differently. Our minds evolve differently. We lead on all levels in the diaspora. Can't none of these people mess with FBAs on an intellectual scholarship level. Can't none of them mess with us. Our master teachers made sure of it. They made sure that our generation was the most equipped generation. They made sure that our generation was the most intelligent generation. And they did this so that we could be here today, so that we would know the information and be able to counter the misinformation. I am one of these people who, I'll say it openly to you, family, I am not a Pan-Africanist. Never will I ever be. Never was I. But I respect our master teachers for equipping us with the knowledge that they did. Because if they didn't equip us with the knowledge that we have today, we wouldn't be able to do this delineation movement. We wouldn't know that there were blacks in the Northern Hemisphere. We wouldn't know that there were black people all over the planet. Even during the Ice Age, there were black people all over the planet. Even when black folks started migrating out into the Northern Hemisphere, up into Asia, into Europe, they were still black. Our master teachers let us know that it wasn't the YT man who was the first man. It was the black man who was the first man. Countering all of that YT education that many of us grew up with, our master teachers told us. But that was a stage, family. That was a stage in our development. We had to go through that. It was a detox. It was a psyop. They had to break us down to rebuild us. So now that we got the information, the seed is watered, the plant has grown. We're here now in 2026. Hidden Color 6 is dropping. Talking about resisting. Talking about FBA's resisting. And family, this is the fight of our lives, because this is a fight for survival. Our master teachers in their time weren't facing what we're facing with in this time. They didn't understand when they were giving us that information that there will be waves of millions and millions and millions of immigrants coming here, trying to lineage swap us, trying to decimate and desecrate our image to the world, coming here claiming that they're us, tethering. Our master teachers didn't see that coming. They looked at Africa from a romanticized perspective. They didn't look at Africa from a tribal perspective, that these are just a bunch of tribes on top of each other, who when they come here, they're just looking at us as another tribe. Our master teachers didn't see that. We do. We got the information. We got the lived experience. Now we can put things into perspective and understand that what the master teachers did for us was a necessary stage of our development so that we could be right here, right now, and see things with a clear perspective. So we can no longer romanticize Africa for what we think or what we wanted it to be. We can actually see it for what it is. And Africa is a land occupied by traders, by turncoats, by opportunists, by scammers, by Arab supremacy, by falsehoods, false prophets, and by famine and poverty. And a lot of people there are fleeing, trying to come here and assume a position as African American. And that's a problem, family. You can't come from Nigeria, Somalia, Kenya, Ghana, and just assume my lineage because you came here and you ain't been in my struggle. You understand? You don't earn that right. But we're dealing with people who are just by force coming here and just basically forcing themselves, basically colonizing. They're colonizing. They're coming here and saying, I'm an African American. You're an African American. We're the same. And you're going to be the same. And that's it. And when we say, hold on, I'm not African. Okay. And they're saying, well, why are you being divisive? Trying to force you into a corner, making you having to submit to an identity that they want you to. And this is the reason why Hidden Color 6 is important in 2026. Because if we're going to talk about resisting, then we have to talk about resisting this neo-colonialism that's coming from folks in Africa and folks in the diaspora, where they're coming here and just basically trying to put us in a corner to conformity, to an identity that they want us to be so they can leech off of it. And that's unacceptable. And we cannot do that. This is the era of resistance. And this is the reason why Hidden Color 6 resistance is just as important now more than ever. We need this, family. We need people to understand that our lineage is not up for debate. Our lineage is not up for grabs. Our lineage is not something that you can just hop on a boat or a plane and come over here and assume a position into. Our lineage is hundreds and hundreds of years old. A genetic, biological connection to this land that other people unfortunately do not have. Does it mean we're better? No. Does it mean we're worse? No. It just means that we are who we are. We're foundational Black Americans, and they are who they are, and that's okay. We don't need to have a problem, nor do we want a problem. My grandmama came from Mississippi, Biloxi, Mississippi in 1957, but she left 9 of her kids in Mississippi to come to the Bronx for work. In Mississippi, my mom, my uncles, and my aunties were children ranging from age 5 to about 12, and they were left to fend for themselves. My uncle told me stories about them going and stealing chickens off people's farms, doing what they had to do to survive, going into people's gardens and taking potatoes and taking collard greens and just doing what they had to do. My uncle told me a story where they would just be knocking on people's doors and asking them, could they stay with them because they didn't have no food at home. And eventually their home ended up getting bulldozed. And my grandmother went up to the Bronx in 57, became a nurse. And the first check she got, she bought Greyhound tickets for all 9 of her children and brought them to the Bronx. This is how my family got to the Bronx. Jamaicans, Africans, Dominicans don't have that story. They can't tell you a story like that. They don't have that story. They have a story. It's just an immigrant story. And that's okay. You don't have an FBA story, though. You have an immigrant story. So while we're talking about our lineage, it should be respected as they talk about their lineage. Black ain't black all across the board. There's Black immigrants and there's foundational Blacks. And it should be respected all across the board. So if we're going to talk about resisting, then this has to be resisted. And I'll say this, family. Hidden Colors changed my life It changed many of our lives. But as misinformation continues to be the number one weapon of propaganda for mass deception, we have to continue to fund our people who put themselves on the front lines to properly educate our people. We have to step up and we have to support them at all costs, at any cost. So why is Hidden Colors just as important today as it was when it first came out? Because these people are still feeding misinformation at a major scale. The same way that we're doing before, they're still doing it now. So it's on us to make sure that we create a platform to fight misinformation. And Hidden Colors is that platform. It is that. Many of us understand this and don't just talk about it, we live this. Understand. This journey of fighting for our position, fighting for our lineage, and the respect and honor of our ancestors must continue. And it is just as hard today as it was 100 years ago. Because now we are dealing with 20 million illegals and all kinds of other people putting themselves in a position of power and doing an immigrant takeover and trying to monopolize businesses and keep us out of it. So how do we fight that, family? How do we counter that? We have to support FBA businesses. We have to support FBA creators, people who don't mind taking a little extra time to fight for their people, to fight for us, family.
King. Look. Let your angel sing. I ain't twisted, this ain't the Henny talking for me. This is literally Malcolm Little talking through me. I ain't possessed, this is just when spirit meets the flesh and a revolutionary is born, nothing less. It's hard for me to cope with stress, especially when I see the world much different from the rest. I can't sleep, nightmares, waking up, cold sweat, wondering if I ever made it, will they do me like the rest? It's for my black souls who really do upset the rest, so they wander through my dreams. Please tell me what this means.